We are back after a short break, and Ms. Katz, I believe we returned to the department for their rebuttal.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. The department will call back Ms. Keene and Mr. Palmer for rebuttal. So I'm just gonna wait for Mr. Palmer if there he is. Okay. Ms. Keene, regarding Oxy's request for extending the compliance deadlines for existing tanks to 2029, as was discussed by Mr. Holderman in his testimony. Upon further review of the number of affected tanks, would the department accept that that request?
Yes, given that there will be thousands of existing tanks subject to this part, the department would support Oxy's original proposed compliance deadlines.
Thank you. Ms. Keene, can you explain the department's position regarding Clean Air Advocates' request to add an automatic tank measurement system requirement?
Yes. So there were a consortium of stakeholders, including EDF, the Center for Civic Policy, and NAVA Education Project, and Clean Air Advocates that proposed to require operators utilize a storage vessel measurement system on new storage vessels to determine the quantity of liquids in the storage tanks. And this would allow FEEF hatches to remain closed during the measurement of the tank's contents, which would minimize emissions. Oxy, USA, and NMOGA generally support this requirement. And Nmed agrees with the commenters that the use of a storage vessel measurement system on new storage vessels to determine the quantity of liquids in the vessels would reduce emissions. And so Nmed generally accepts and supports the proposal.
Thank you. Can you discuss CDG's request to exclude certain types of vessels from the definition of storage vessel, and what the department's position is with respect to that request?
Yes, and I spoke to this earlier in our PowerPoint presentation for storage vessels. CDG proposed to revise the definition of storage vessel to exclude certain types of vessels, including process vessels that are surge control bottom receivers or knockout vessels, and the department does agree with that change, which would align with the definition of storage vessel within the definition of NSPS Quad OA.
Thank you. And has CDG provided any emissions data for their storage vessels, or any data justifying why it would be technically infeasible to control those storage vessel emissions?
The department did not receive any emissions data regarding those specific storage vessels, or any data to indicate why it is technically infeasible to control those emissions. CDG is requesting exemptions from the rule for their storage vessels, but they did not provide that information establishing why those additional exemptions would be necessary.
And how does the rule address existing low emitting storage vessels?
The rule as proposed has an applicability on-ramp of 3 tons per year and provides an off-ramp from the requirements of the section if the actual emissions are less than 2 tons per year. So it was unclear why this applicability threshold and this off-ramp from the section are not sufficient to address those low emission storage vessels.
And Ms. Keene, despite those 2 points that you have just made, observing those issues, has the department considered CDG's request to add language to section 123 that would authorize an exception for those storage vessels for which vapors do not meet minimum BTU values for the combustion device based on manufacturer specifications?
Yes, we did review the request. I think the department understands the concept of the technical issue identified by CDG. Without the data to support those claims, we were not able to verify whether those were appropriate or not. But we understand the concept around this issue. And so the department agrees that the issue warrants a very narrow exception if it is accompanied by a record verifying the BTU of the vapor from those storage vessels, which would then demonstrate that the vapor is in fact below the threshold established by manufacturers.
Thank you. So turning to Mr. Palmer, do any other state rules have similar applicability thresholds for existing storage tanks as that proposed by the department?
Yes, Colorado, Colorado Regulation 7 has an applicability threshold of 2 tons per year VOC for existing storage tanks.
And Mr. Palmer, if the rule were to exempt tanks that were between 3 and 6 tons per year, emitted 3 and 6 tons per year, how many tanks would that leave unaddressed, and what would the emissions from those tanks be?
The Nmed equipment data shows that there are 694 tanks with allowable VOC emissions between 3 and 6 tons per year. And those 694 tanks account for 3,149 tons per year of VOC.
Thank you. In response to the testimony that was presented by Mr. Meyer on behalf of NMOGA, can the department estimate the cost for controlling a single storage vessel with a combustor?
Yes. Since his testimony, we went back and looked at our storage tank cost spreadsheet, and we set it up to estimate the cost for a small storage tank. And I can walk folks through that spreadsheet really quickly if I can screen share.
And this is the spreadsheet that was submitted as NMED Exhibit 100.
That is correct. Yes. Okay, I'm going to share. Okay. Right. So this is the same spreadsheet that we actually reviewed, I think, earlier in the week, except that we've just set it up for this single tank analysis. And actually within the sheet, we took some of the values from Mr. Meyer's memo that he prepared for Baylor and plugged them into the sheet. So these cells that are highlighted in pink are the ones that we've modified to use the information from Baylor. And so we selected for a combustor the value for a 48-inch, 23,000 standard cubic foot per day combustor from table 6 in his memo. And then for storage vessel replacement, we selected the value for a 300 or 400 barrel tank from table 7 in his memo. And plug those into the spreadsheet. I think those are really the only values we replaced. And then, so this is a total capital investment. These are the annualized costs here. And then we just, down at the bottom, we calculated what the ton per year, or excuse me, the cost per ton would be.
So, Mr. Palmer, I'm going to have you, for the record, you need to say what the numbers are.
Okay, sure. All right, so we selected for a combustor cost, $10,500. The total annualized cost of the combustor, freight and design, auto igniter, surveillance system, combustor installation, and the would be $2,144. The cost of the storage vessel is $18,000, and the annualized cost of that is $1,535. The annual O&M cost would remain at $14,659, so that the total annual cost would be $18,377. So then we calculated what the cost per ton emission would be at 95% control. So at 3 tons per year, the cost per ton would be $6,434 per ton. At 4 tons per year, it would be $4,826. At 6 tons per year, it would be $3,217. And at 8 tons per year, it would be $2,413. And I will stop there since all those are even less.
It gets progressively lower as the
It gets
emissions
progressively lower,
rise.
correct. Yes, at 10 tons per year, it's $1,930.
That's
So,
fine. Thank you. And so I believe that's all the Sir rebuttal questions that I have for NMED's witnesses.
Thank you very much, Ms. Katz. If you're a party with questions of the department panel, please turn on your camera. Not seeing anyone. Oh, there's Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I was wondering if Mr. Palmer could put the spreadsheet back up.
Sure.
At the risk of alienating everybody, I guess we can talk about it.
Okay.
See if I can, see if I can make it
Zoom
in.
in.
Just can't read it.
And zoom in for you.
Yeah, no, that helps. I can actually see it now.
Not on mute.
It's an interesting conversation, but yeah. With respect to, and I think we went through it before, but I just want to make sure I understand. If I look at line 6, your 2012 dollars is 18,000. 2019 is 10,000. So is
Correct. These are these numbers here from the original CTG
okay.
spreadsheet. The ones in pink, these 2019 ones, are the ones that we are using now.
And that's, it looks like you're attributing that to, is that Valor's numbers? Is that what that means?
Correct.
And so if I read this correctly, the price of the unit now is about half or a little more than half of what it was in 2012.
Well, this was a single tank analysis that we did using the combustor sizes that he had in table 6.
Okay.
So it's a smaller tank, it's a smaller combustor, and so we were just sort of looking at you know, what would happen if you plugged in some of the numbers from his tables, and assumed it was just for a single tank, because he had said that Facilities with
It's
these
not
smaller.
comparable,
single
Brian,
tanks.
it's not comparable to the 2012 values that are in the other
Correct.
column,
Right.
right?
Right, it's not comparable, yeah.
Okay, and that kind of surprised me, seeing the numbers being that much lower. Your total capital investment is 43,000. That's based on 2019 dollars. And
Correct.
an annualized cost, I think is, and then correct me, is based on financing that capital investment over a period of time. And I think you assumed an interest rate, looks like, of 3.25%.
Correct.
Which these
And there's
days is
two,
a bad interest rate.
there's two annualized costs here.
Okay.
There's, this one is these values here. And then this one is this value here for the tank.
And I guess the question I had, does this assume that the company that's actually installing the unit would finance the proposal over a period of time?
It does, it does.
And do you know whether or not that's the way in which these oil and gas companies finance these kinds of replacements?
I am not certain about that.
Okay. Now, thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I have no further questions.
Mr. Rose, did I see Mr. Heiser on screen?
You did. Mr. Palmer, when you were putting this together, why did you choose the standard combustor for a single tank, which has the very limited headspace and thus requires a larger volume flow in order to avoid popping the thief hatch or the pressure relief valve?
I can't answer that question. It looked like it was a reasonable cost, but perhaps I misinterpreted the data. So
What would
I'd
happen
be
if,
interested to hear what Mr. Meyer would say.
we can certainly bring back Mr. Meyer to speak to that particular issue on your spreadsheet if you would like. But he might suggest maybe that the 18,881 value that you show there, which is for the high volume combustor, in lieu of the 10,500, and what difference does that make?
1881, I'm sorry.
See that you've got a pink line on row G7, cell G7.
This one?
Yeah, that's the high volume, which we would probably use for that type of small headspace vessel.
Uh-huh. So
It'd be 18,881. Not that $700 probably makes that much difference.
well, I was pulling the $8,100 out
Oh,
from his table.
okay.
But here are your numbers now.
Okay. Madam Hearing Officer, would it be possible, and Ms. Katz, to have this produced as an exhibit so we could quickly take a look at it?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
This is, and again, this is just the same spreadsheet that we've been using and that I think Mr. Meyer actually manipulated as well. So it's our exhibit 100.
100, okay.
Yeah. So it's,
Great.
hopefully user friendly.
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry. I just want to clarify something for myself. So in your rebuttal testimony, I seem to remember a figure of around 13,000 per ton for a 2 ton per year tank. And that was the basis for adjusting to the 3 ton per year threshold for those tanks. Can you just help us understand what the difference is and why it's looking so different now that we've increased the costs?
That was for 2 tons per year, which we did not include in here. That's from the CTG, the 2 ton per year value.
So I believe before you said there was a spread between the 4-ton and the 2-ton of something like 9 to 13. And so you,
Well, the cost per ton was linear, assuming that the combustor cost was fixed. And so here's the original. I redisplayed it. So it was 13,260 and 6630. So this is just twice that.
so at the risk of asking stupid questions on the record, I'm going to ask anyway. My understanding of Mr. Meyer's testimony was that the costs would increase. And so going down to your table below, how are we going down from your original number? So for example, in cell B35,
We were assuming a smaller system for a smaller single tank, but perhaps
I'm just trying to understand the apples to apples comparison here.
one big issue was that that we couldn't quite understand was that Mr. Meyer had included a high retrofit cost for the tank, storage vessel retrofit of $70,000. Whereas he also had on there a tank replacement. And so we said, well, why retrofit the tank when you could replace it for less? So that's what's going on here. And perhaps we misinterpreted what he meant by tank replacement versus tank retrofit.
I'm certainly not an expert on this. I'm just trying to understand my very visceral reaction that if we are trying to account for increased costs that Mr. Meyer has projected, that we wouldn't see a dramatic reduction in cost per ton. And so I'm trying to understand why that's happening.
What we were trying to look at was the single tank situation that Mr. Meyer, the smaller single tank situations, which he seemed to imply represented a lot of the low emitting tanks.
And Brian, that's what this is doing. This is showing that it's attempting to show that single tank situation, which is why it's not comparable to what we had in that original spreadsheet. Right?
Yes.
Okay, well, we would appreciate the opportunity to review it. Thanks for answering those questions.
Thank you. If you would stop screen sharing for just a moment. I'll see if there are any other parties with questions. Let's see here. I don't see anyone else. I will turn then to the board for questions. While I'm doing that, if you're an attendee on this platform with a question, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. From the discussion I heard, it sounds like we'll have more discussion on this spreadsheet. So I'll wait to have my questions after that further discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
I'm in agreement. I think there'll be more discussion and once we get a chance to look at that a little bit further. But I also want to note that I appreciate you putting the numbers together for the single tank example for just to kind of expand on that argument for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Member Cates. Member Bitzer.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia.
One quick question for clarification. This might be for Ms. Keene. You were saying you agreed about the use of a storage measurement system for new storage tanks. Is that the same as auto gauge?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Member Honker.
No questions, thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Katz, any follow-up?
No, Madam Hearing Officer, no follow-up.
All right, thank you, Ms. Keene and Mr. Palmer. Mr. Rose.
Yes, Madam Hearing Officer. Yesterday, we discussed a case in the Court of Appeals that we didn't have the citation for, which I now have. And I failed to recall that, in fact, you were represented one of the parties in the litigation. That's a Southwest Organizing Project case. And I have the site, just in case folks want to look at it. It's at 482 Pacific 3rd, 1273. It's 2020. And Ms. Katz was, I think, filed an amicus, as did I. So that was the court case I was referring to. Just wanted to make it clear for the record.
Thank you very much. Is there anything further on this topic? Subject to Mr. Heiser's question of Mr. Smitherman.
Yeah, we've got Mr. Smitherman's testimony, and if you will indulge us, we are going to have Mr. Meyer take a brief look at what Mr. Palmer just presented, and we might have just a direct response in a couple of those line items, just as to what the difference of interpretation was.
All right. Is it time then to move to pig receiving and launching? Pig launching and receiving.
Yes, that works for the department. If it works for others.
We're confirming, so it should work for Nivoga.
I just need a moment here, sorry. And the department will be calling Ms. Keene and Mr. Palmer again. This section, this testimony relates to section 20.2.50.121, pig launching and receiving. The department's testimony, written testimony, appears at NMED Exhibit 32, beginning on page 116, and at NMED Rebuttal Exhibit 1, beginning on page 79. And witnesses have adopted this testimony already, and I don't believe there are any corrections that need to be made. So if Ms. Keene can have sharing privileges to share the PowerPoint. Ms. Keene, if you would begin with discussing the equipment and processes that are the subject of this section of the rule.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, members of the board. Today we'll be discussing section 121, which covers pig launching and receiving operations. As we've heard several times over the last 2 weeks, natural gas passing through gathering pipelines contains volatile organic compounds, and changes in temperature and pressure may result in development of natural gas condensates in a liquid phase in the pipeline, and those condensates can accumulate in low elevation segments of the gathering pipelines, impeding the flow of natural gas. To maintain gas flow, operators insert a device called a pig into the pipeline, which is swept along the pipeline by the pressure of the existing gas flow. Condensate formed in the pipeline is pushed in front of the pig until it reaches a receiver. The pig is then isolated in a pipeline segment, and condensate and liquids are drained out of the pipeline. The pig is then reinserted and swept along the next segment. And emissions occur at the pig launcher and receiver when the pipeline is opened to insert or extract the pig. And emissions from pigging operations depend on factors such as the launcher or receiver volume, pipeline pressure, the amount of liquid trapped in the pig receiver barrel prior to depressurization, the frequency of pigging, and the gas composition.
And can you discuss the options that are available for controlling emissions from pig launching and receiving?
Yes, there are a number of control options to control emissions, including process modifications, add-on controls, such as a flare, enclosed combustor, or thermal oxidizer, or by using a vapor recovery unit to collect the vapors and route them back into the process. And process modifications identified by EPA to minimize emissions during these events include installing pig ball valves, receiver barrel design, installing the use of pig ramps, routing the high pressure systems to lower pressure lines, barrel pump down systems, and enhanced liquid containment.
Thank you. And can you summarize the emissions standards in the rule that the requirements for pig launching and receiving?
Yes, so owners and operators of affected facilities are required to comply with best management practices and emission limits. Owners and operators of pigging operations with the potential to emit equal to or greater than 1 ton per year of VOC are required to capture and reduce VOC emissions by at least 95%. Owners and operators must employ best management practices and equipment modifications during pigging operations to prevent or reduce emissions.
Thank you. And turning to Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer, can you discuss the basis for the proposed requirements in section 121 and the estimated emissions reductions and costs?
Yes, I can. The proposed requirements for pig launching and receiving are based on Pennsylvania General Permits 5 and 5A, Ohio's General Permit 21.1, and also EPA guidance on pig launching and receiving. The Pennsylvania General Permits requires best management practices for all pigging operations and 95% control of emissions from pigging operations with emissions equal to or above 2.7 ton per year of VOC after the application of best management practices. Ohio General Permit 21.1 limits VOC's emissions from each discrete pig launcher or receiver to less than 0.27 tons per month averaged over a rolling 12-month period, which is equivalent to less than 3.24 tons per year. The Ohio General Permits require the use of an add-on control device to control emissions if needed to comply with the VOC emission limitations. And then the EPA guidance provides best management practices recommended in EPA's fact sheet number 505, which is entitled Recover Gas from Pipeline Pigging Operations. Okay, for the pigging facilities identified in the NMED equipment inventory, the NMED estimates an overall emission reduction of 22.9 tons of allowable VOC as a result of the rule. However, the NMED equipment inventory does not list all pigging facilities, so greater emission reductions are expected as a result of the rule. Also, comparably in the emission inventory, pigging operations are not I believe, a separate line item under a separate source category code. And so the pigging operations emissions in the inventory are probably accounted for as fugitive emissions. Implementation costs of a skid-mounted flare were estimated to be $21,000 with operating costs of about $3,000 per year. And this is from values calculated by the US EPA in the Gas Star program's fact sheet for installing flares, and that's from 2011.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. And Ms. Keene, can you walk through the provisions of the rule and summarize those and discuss the revisions that the department made based on stakeholder comments.
Yes. So before you is the proposed section 121. It follows the similar framework for other sections. We have applicability in paragraph A. We received comments from NMOGA, Kinder Morgan, and CDG. They proposed revisions that would apply to individual pig launching and receivers with a PTE equal to or greater than 1 ton per year. The stakeholders, NMOGA in particular, also proposed requirements only applied to pig launchers and receivers located within the property boundary of listed facilities. And CDG further requested revisions specifying that those be under common ownership and control with those facilities. NMED reviewed the basis for those proposals and agreed with those revisions for the reasons outlined in their direct and rebuttal testimony. Paragraph B identifies the emission standards and requirements for pig launcher and receiver operations. Paragraph 1 establishes that owners and operators of affected pigging and launching and receiving operations must comply with the requirement within 2 years of the effective date of this part. NMOGA requested an extension to the compliance deadline of 3 years, but did not justify that request. But the department did agree that a 2-year timeline to comply was appropriate. We've also amended this section to state that if a combustion control device is used, that the combustion device have a minimum design combustion efficiency of 98%. Paragraph B, 2 through D outline the emission requirements or the best practice management practices. I won't go into a great detail on these requirements. I'll speak to them briefly. They're required to employ best management practices to minimize the liquid present in the chambers and to minimize those emissions before they have an opportunity to be vented to the atmosphere. They're required to employ a method to reduce or prevent emissions, such as installing a liquid ramp or drain, routing high pressure chamber to a low pressure liner vessel, or use of a ball valve type of chamber, or using multiple chambers. They're also required to recover and dispose of liquid in a manner that minimizes emissions to the extent practicable, and to ensure material collected is done in a manner compliant with state law. Paragraph B3 has an off-ramp for the requirements of this rule. If the individual pipeline pig launching and receiving operation has actual annual VOC emissions of less than 1 ton per year. And the paragraph B4 requires owners and operators using a control device to comply with this section, to comply with the control device requirements that are established in section 115. The monitoring requirements again outline the type of monitoring that must be conducted to determine compliance with the emission standards of this part. One agreement that the department has made was to strike the monitoring of the type and volume of liquid cleared. We did not think that was necessary to monitor that specific parameter. We do require the owner or operator of an affected facility to inspect the equipment for leaks using either an AVO, a reference method 21, or optical gas imaging on either a monthly basis if those operations at a site occur on a monthly basis or more, or prior to the commencement of an operation if it's less frequent than monthly. So these modifications were made also. by Namoga and Kinder Morgan, and the department agreed that an AVO is an appropriate screening tool to check for those leaks. And agreed that the monitoring frequency should be staggered to account for those facilities that have less frequent pigging activities. Paragraph C2 requires that the monitoring be performed using the methodologies outlined in 116 as applicable and at the frequency required as outlined in C1 above. Again, section 116 are the leak detection and repair requirements under a different part of the rule. And then paragraphs 3 and 4, again, point to both the control device monitoring requirements that are established in section 115, and then the general monitoring requirements that are found in the general provisions of section 112. Paragraph D outlines the record keeping requirements. These ensure that information is recorded in order to determine compliance with the monitoring as outlined by paragraph C. So the record keeping requirements are for owners and operators subject to this section to identify the location, date, and time of the pigging event, to utilize data to estimate the actual emissions to the atmosphere and document that information that was used to estimate the potential to emit, and to record the date and time of any monitoring and the results of the monitoring, and to document the type of control device and its make and model, and to comply with the generic general record keeping provisions of 112. We did not receive any comments on paragraph E. That concludes this overview of our direct and rebuttal.
Thank you, Ms. Keene. That's all the department has at this time.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Keene and Mr. Palmer and Ms. Katz. Are there any parties, excuse me, any parties with questions of the department panel? I'm not seeing any screens. I'll go to the board for their questions. While I'm doing that, please reach out through the chat if you're an attendee with a question. Madam Chair?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis?
Yes, just a couple to clarify. I fully admit here, I know just enough about pigging to get myself in trouble. So I'm really just looking for some clarification on things. So I know pig launchers and pig receivers can be located on and off facilities. I know there's plenty of them out in the middle of a pasture somewhere. So is the department proposing that pig launchers and receivers located on a location have permanently installed equipment, and then pig launchers and receivers that are located off of location could have like temporary equipment used when they're those events are occurring? Like,
Thank you, Vice Chair Trujillo Davis. And so this section of the rule would only apply to within the property boundary of an existing facility. And so the remote location would not be subject to this section unless it was located within the property boundary of an existing site. And those are, tank batteries, well sites, gas plants, compressor stations.
okay, thank you for clarifying that for me. I appreciate it. I don't have any more questions.
Thank you. Member Cates?
No questions here. Thank you.
Member Bitzer?
I know a lot about pigging out, but no, I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. And Member Honker?
Just one, and I'm looking at section B3, I think. It's the exemption or the requirements cease to apply if the actual annual VOC emissions of the launcher or receiver operation are less than 1 ton per year. I'm just curious how that is calculated.
Thank you, Member Bitzer. That would be calculated by estimating the length of the pipeline and then the quantity of natural gas, the concentration of VOC within the gas, and then the expected venting of that emission stream to the atmosphere.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Ms. Katz?
No, nothing from me. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Keen, Mr. Palmer, and Ms. Katz. I believe we turn now to Ms. Nolte and Kinder Morgan. Is that true, Ms. Gutierrez?
We are prepared to present.
Thank you.
May I please have screen sharing permissions? Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Ana Gutierrez with Hogan Lovells on behalf of Kinder Morgan. This testimony is going to relate to Kinder Morgan Direct Technical Testimony Exhibit 8, which I believe is in the record, and we've confirmed there are no revisions. Ms. Nolting, I believe this is your last presentation before the board, but for for good measure, could you please introduce yourself for the record?
Yes, I'm Leslie Nolting, and I'm an EHS manager for Kinder Morgan, focused on air permitting and compliance.
And did you submit written direct technical testimony at Exhibit 8 regarding pig launching and receiving?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to that testimony? And if not, do you adopt it in full?
I don't have any changes to that testimony, and I do adopt it in full.
Thank you. And could you please summarize for the board and the parties your testimony regarding pig launching and receiving?
Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. I'd originally planned to discuss the topics shown on this screen. However, because the department has incorporated changes to the proposed rules that address our concerns, I'll limit my testimony to expressing Kinder Morgan's support for the department's September 16th draft language. Specifically, the department has revised paragraph C1 to make clear that sites that conduct pig launching and receiving operations less frequently than once a month, monitoring will be tied to the frequency of the pig launching and receiving activities themselves. This addresses our concern that the rules may have required monthly monitoring at pigging sites, which would not have made sense in the context of our operations because we conduct pigging operations very infrequently. With that, Mr. Brindley and myself are available for questions from the board or other parties.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nolte. If you're a party, please turn on your camera. Question Ms. Nolting or Mr. Brindley. I'm not seeing anyone. I'll turn to the board. If you're an attendee and have a question, please reach out through chat. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and thank you, Ms. Nolting, for your testimony over these last few days as well. I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
Yes, just one. I'm curious, how often do you conduct pigging operations?
It depends. I think for our typical sites in New Mexico, it's around once per year. We just don't get a lot of liquids in our lines, right? So we just don't have to do it as often.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, that there was a standard of how much liquids could be in the gas as it came from the operator and entered your system. So to kind of cut down on those liquids. Was I okay?
Yeah, that's correct. We have kind of tariff specifications that our gas has to meet before it even comes into our lines. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. No more questions.
Thank you. Member Cates?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Member Bitzer?
No questions, thank you.
Member Garcia?
No questions, thank you.
And Member Hunker?
No questions, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any follow-up, Ms. Gutierrez?
None from me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ms. Gutierrez, and Ms. Nolting, and Mr. Brindley for being available. Do we move now to GCA Witness Jones? Is that what I understand?
Madam Hearing Officer, this is Chris Colclasure. Mr. Jones is a witness for the Commercial Disposal Group, not the GCA.
I'm very sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
But he is available. We are not seeking any additional changes to the department's September 16th version of the regulation. We do appreciate the changes that the department has made. As a formality, we think we need to adopt Mr. Jones's written testimony, so it is part of the record. Can we do that just based on no objections from the parties, or do you need him to come on screen? I can ask him the questions to admit it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The board's rules require that all testimony be taken under oath, so I do need him to adopt it under oath. Remind me his first name, please.
Greg Jones.
Greg. All right. I'm about to panelize him. It's not letting me panelize him. He may have to sign back on. The button is gray. It's not letting me do it.
Would he have audio capability? That may be enough.
Oh, I'll unmute him. Thank you for that. Mr. Jones, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Terrific. I can hear you as well. Have I already sworn you in?
No, ma'am.
Okay. If you would please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Colclasure.
Mr. Jones, can you state your name and employer?
Yes, my name is Greg Jones, Gregjones. I am currently a air compliance specialist for 3 Bear, Delaware operating.
Did you submit written direct and rebuttal testimony in this case?
Yes, sir, I did.
And is your testimony attached to the Commercial Disposal Group's Notice of Intent to present direct testimony as Exhibit E and Notice of Intent to present direct rebuttal testimony as Exhibit D?
Yes, sir, it is.
Do you have any changes to your written testimony?
No, sir, I do not.
If I asked you the same questions today, would you give the same answers today?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to adopt your written testimony as your testimony in this hearing?
Yes, sir.
And Madam Hearing Officer, unless any parties are going to seek any revisions to the department's latest draft, I don't think Mr. Jones needs to testify, but we can make him available for cross-examination based on his written testimony and available for questions from the board.
Thank you very much. No, I don't think he needs to go through it. Thank you for offering. Let me ask any party with questions of Mr. Jones to turn on their camera. I didn't see anyone. I'll turn to the board. If you're an attendee with a question, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair.
No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Member Cates.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Member Bitzer.
No questions.
Thank you. Member Garcia.
No questions, thank you.
And Member Honker.
No questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Jones and Mr. Colclasure.
And
Thank
Madam
you.
Hearing Officer, I think I actually neglected to say that we asked the board to adopt his written testimony in the hearing. Just to put that on the record, we are moving it into adoption in the record.
All right. Thank you. It's admitted.
Thank you.
All right. Do we move then to Ms. Textor and then back to the department? Is that a correct read of the plan here, Mr. Curtis?
I believe so, yes.
All right. I panelize Ms. Textor.
Excellent, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Ms. Texter, are you there with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you. Could we please give Ms. Texter screen sharing capabilities? Ms. Texter, can you please state your name for the record?
Yes, it's Maurice Texter.
What has been your involvement in the proceeding?
I was asked by NMOGA to testify regarding glycol dehydrators and pig launching and receiving.
And you've previously testified and adopted your testimony in this matter, correct?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, we just wanted to run through a few of the points that you wanted to cover on pigging and launching. If you could share your screen, and we'll begin. As you heard Ms. Keene and the other parties testify, many of the changes that were advocated by NMOGA previously have been adopted. And so to the extent we can to expedite the hearing, we'll rely on those statements that have been made to reflect those changes. But let's go ahead and start on slide 4, I believe.
Oops. There we go. I'm sorry, I've got the wrong one up.
Oh, that's okay.
Give me another second. Okay, now I have the right one up. Go back to full screen. There we go. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay. Excellent. Let's go ahead and please share your testimony as it relates to this slide.
Yes, so we believe that pig launching and receiving should be deleted entirely from the rule. And EPA did not include controlling emissions from pig launching and receiving in several different rules and documents. The first one is the control techniques guidelines that were issued in 2016 in the Obama administration, which recommends control techniques for significant sources of ozones in ozone non-attainment areas. So this would not be a control that would be required under the under those control techniques guidelines. Secondly, EPA proposed a federal implementation plan for oil and gas sources on the UNO tribal reservation in the Uinta Basin ozone non-attainment area in 2020. They've not finalized that rule yet, but the proposal does not include controls for pig launching and receiving. Of course, the final rule would not include controls that would be more stringent than the proposal. And then lastly, pig launching and receiving controls have not been included in the new source performance standards for crude oil and natural gas facilities, the Quad O and Quad OA rules. So we also believe that NMED has not fully vetted the challenges of controlling these emissions in New Mexico with remote sites that often lack infrastructure. And then these are relatively low quantity emissions. Yes?
If I can interrupt just for a moment. The latest changes that Ms. Keene testified to in terms of the applicability language of the rule, is it correct that those concerns have been addressed with those changes, or are we seeking further revision?
So the changes do the on-site pigging only, but those on-site could still be relatively remote and not have the full infrastructure. For example, there might not be an on-site combustion device to route these to, so that might be needed to be brought in as a portable device.
Thank you for clarifying. Please
so it addresses this in part, but not fully, I don't believe.
Okay.
So these are relatively low quantity emissions, and controlling them, they would likely be routed to a combustion device of some kind that would increase NOx emissions, and that would be directionally the wrong thing to do in New Mexico with its NOx-sensitive ozone regime, as we heard several days ago in the testimony of, I forget his last name, but Ralph from Ramble on behalf of Nmed, and then Dennis from Alpine on behalf of NMOGA. Also, the applicability threshold of 1 ton per year is substantially lower than the threshold in the Pennsylvania and Ohio rules that this was based on. Those are 3 or approximately 3 tons per year. And furthermore, the Pennsylvania rule does not include liquid pigging operations, which the NMOGA proposal does include. And then lastly, the NMED cost estimate significantly underestimates the cost to control the emissions. The cost that was presented by the department a few moments ago is from a 2011 paper that is out of date. We obtained a current cost estimate from one vendor for a portable flare, and it was 3 times higher than the cost estimate in that 2011 paper. Also, the NMED written testimony provided, it represented those costs as a best management practice, but that's not how it's defined in that EPA paper. The EPA paper really identifies a more isolated situation where that particular control scheme could be used. And in particular, it talks about it describes routing the pigging emissions to a low pressure storage tank and then controlling the tank emissions. And it relies on additional equipment, including a compressor, a pump, and gathering lines, which may not be available at the site and would further increase the cost. And then lastly, in the absence of electricity, if the site is remote and does not have electricity, engines would be needed to drive the compressor and the pump, which would emit more ozone-forming NOx. So for all of those reasons, we believe that pig launching and receiving should be deleted entirely from the rule.
Thank you, Ms. Texter. Can we proceed to slide 8?
Yes.
As we're passing through that, I'll note that those are many of the changes that we've proposed and that NMED has adopted. We appreciate that. Go ahead and proceed with this. It appears that NMOGA would request additional time to implement this rule if it is retained. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The rule in its current version from the department provides 2 years for compliance, and NMOGA requests that be increased to 3 years. There's a lot of things that have to be done in the time frame between a final rule and when compliance could actually occur. So there may be capital investment at many of the locations, and capital investment would require folding it into budgeting and funding mechanisms, detailed engineering design, management of change, procuring equipment, contracting to install the equipment, construction, developing procedures, conducting training, and finally startup. And even if the site is going to rely on a portable combustion device, many of those steps would be needed. And then all of that will have to be done concurrent with implementing other requirements of the rule and competing with ongoing labor and supply chain restrictions that have resulted in the wake of COVID-19.
Thank you. Let's proceed to slide 9.
Okay, NMOGA also requests that the emission standards not require installing controls if supplemental fuel would be needed to achieve destruction. So these are fairly short duration and variable emissions because you're depressuring a small volume of equipment to the control device. And so supplemental fuel would be needed in some cases. And with this being a small volume of equipment and then that flow rate dwindling off as it depressures, that's what would create the need for the supplemental fuel. The addition of supplemental fuel poses several problems. It increases the cost, which was not accounted for in the department's cost evaluation. It would increase VOC emissions because of the combustion efficiency of the supplemental fuel. It would increase NOx emissions that are directionally the wrong way to go due to the need to combust the supplemental fuel. And it's possible, considering the small amount of emissions being controlled, that there would actually be no benefit to air quality at all, or even an increase in ozone, considering the NOx emissions and added VOC emissions. So we request that the controls not be required if the situation requires including supplemental fuel.
Thank you, Ms. Texter. Let's proceed to slide 10.
And can I just, on that slide, I just have to say that that I don't believe that language was proposed before. And we're seeing that for the first time, and it could have been proposed before, so.
That's correct. We've included our rebuttal and surrebuttal in one for economy of time. So your observation is valid.
And what is this surrebuttal to?
To the revisions made on September 7th.
Okay, can you could you identify how that proposal is actually surrebuttal and couldn't have been proposed before?
I think it's upon further reflection in light of the changes that have been made on the September 7th. We've continued to evaluate the proposal and we've identified additional ways to improve it.
Okay, well, I will just note that the department hasn't seen that before.
Go ahead and proceed, Ms. Texter.
Okay, and then we will also request that any portable control devices that are needed to comply with the pigging, launching, and receiving requirements do not have to meet the requirements in Section 115 for control devices. So portable devices may not have all of the monitoring capability that can be installed on fixed equipment in order to meet the monitoring requirements of Section 115. And it's not obvious if the portable devices would be able to be altered accordingly, and especially in cases where rental portable devices are used, the rental company would likely not want their equipment to be altered to add that monitoring capability. So in lieu of requiring portable devices to meet the requirements of Section 115, we request that they be installed consistent with manufacturer's specifications.
Thank you, Ms. Texter. I believe that concludes all of the information that we've not already covered through our other witnesses. Is there anything further?
That was all that I had.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you for your testimony. At this time, we can make Ms. Texter available for additional questions.
Thank you. Mr. Curtis and Ms. Texter, if you're a party with a question, please turn on your camera. No? All right. I will turn then to the board for their questions. While I'm doing that, if you're an attendee on the platform with a question, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I don't have any questions at this time.
All right, thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. So currently for most pigging events, don't operators have some rental fees associated with them?
Rental fees for the equipment, the control device, or rental fees for what?
No, I'm sorry, I should be more specific. I know at this time they don't have any rental fees for control devices, but they rent vac trucks and other things for the events. Is that
That may be the case, or maybe they have other equipment that is not rental.
okay? I was just trying to understand if there had been any comparison costs between the cost of a pigging event now today without the rule, and then the cost of a pigging event if this rule were to come into effect with these standards.
I believe the cost, if these rules became standard, these proposed rules became final, would be incremental to existing costs.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony. I think that there's a lot of valuable points in here for consideration. So thank you.
Yeah, Member Kate?
Thank you.
No questions, thank you.
Member Bitzer? No questions? All right. Member Garcia?
No questions, thank you.
And Member Honker?
No questions, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Sorry,
Oh,
Madam Chair, I missed the button. No question.
sorry. Thank you. Any follow-up, Mr. Curtis?
No, Madam Hearing Officer, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Textor and Mr. Curtis. Ms. Katz, do we go back to the department? We don't have Mr. Smitherman, so.
I believe so. And I guess I would just ask that since we just saw these new proposals, that the department have the opportunity to review those and to potentially respond at a different time to those.
Yes.
Thank you.
I will always support that sort of thing. I see Ms. Keene on the screen.
Thank you. I don't know if Mr. Palmer is available. Give him a minute.
I'm here.
All right. Ms. Keene, does the rule prescribe the type of control device that must be used?
No, the rule does not prescribe the specific type of control device that must be used. It provides a suite of options.
Okay. Mr. Palmer, do other states require emissions reductions associated with pig launching and receiving?
Yes, as described in my direct and rebuttal testimony, these states require controls and emission reductions from pigging. Pennsylvania's GP5A is applicable to sources located at unconventional natural gas well sites and remote pigging stations. And Pennsylvania's GP5 is applicable to sources located at natural gas compression stations, processing plants, and also transmission stations. The best management practices required in the Pennsylvania general permits are required for all pigging operations. The same best management practices are also recommended in EPA's fact sheet number 505. And also a September 2019 EPA enforcement alert, which was EPA publication number 325-F-19-001, which we submitted as NMED Exhibit 88. The VOC emission limits in Pennsylvania GP5 and GP5A apply to pigging operations that still have emissions equal to or greater than 2.7 tons per year after employing best management practices. The Pennsylvania emission limit requires the owner or operator to control VOC emissions from all pigging operations by at least 95% with a control device. And we submitted this as NMED Exhibit 37 and 38. Ohio has similar emission limits for pigging operations in its general permits. Both general permits limit VOC emissions from one discrete pig launcher or receiver to less than 0.27 tons per month, averaged over the rolling 12-month period. And as I stated earlier, that's equivalent to 3.24 tons per year. And the Ohio general permits require the use of add-on control device to control the emissions if needed to comply with those VOC emission limits. And we included this in our Exhibit 86 at page 4.
Thank you. And has Colorado also recently proposed regulations for pigging operations?
Actually, they have not. However, they are including pig launching in their emission inventories that facilities are required to complete.
Okay. Ms. Keene, has Colorado recently proposed regulations for pig launching and receiving?
Yes.
Ms. Keene, did NMOGA request the 1 ton per year threshold?
Yes.
And did the department in fact accept most of the industry parties' requested revisions in order to address their specific concerns?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That is all I have.
All right, thank you very much. Let's see here. Ms. Witherspoon, have you joined us on screen to ask questions of the department on this topic? Oops. I'm trying to unmute her, but it's not letting me. She may be having trouble connecting. Let me ask if there are any other parties with questions of the department panel. Please turn on your screen. No. I'll turn then to the board for their questions. If you're an attendee on this platform, please reach out through the chat with any questions. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and thank you, Ms. Keene and Mr. Palmer. So just so I'm clear that we'll continue, the department will continue to look at some of the latest information we heard today, and then continue to do an analysis or some due diligence regarding some of and respond to some of those proposals. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair Sweeney. Yes, the department will do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
I don't have any more questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Cates.
No questions here. Thank you.
Member Bitzer.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia.
Questions, thank you.
And Member Honker.
No questions, thank you.
So we're very nearly finished with another topic. Some of us are just.
Can I just do, I'm sorry.
All right. Ms. Katz, sorry. Ms. Katz.
That's great. Can I just had one quick follow-up. I'm sorry for Ms. Keene. Ms. Keene, regarding Chair Sweeney's question to you, will the department follow up on the new proposals that we've just seen from NMOGA?
Yes, we will, and that will be limited to only those new items that were brought up.
And do we stand on our existing testimony relating to the previous issues that were raised in the pre-file testimony?
Yes, we do.
Thank you.
I did, this is Mr. Curtis. I did just want to clarify one thing. Those changes are reflected in the MOGA Exhibit 47 that we submitted on September 7th. And so just for the department's reference, you can see those in that document. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And it's helpful if you would point that out in the testimony when that's filed. Otherwise, we don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Katz, Ms. Keen, Mr. Palmer. I think, let me see if I can get to Ms. Witherspoon. She appeared briefly. I have panelized her when she reconnected. Ms. Witherspoon, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Were you joining us for pig launching and receiving or for another topic?
I was just joining because I haven't been around for a while.
All right.
And then my computer locked up.
Okay. I'm glad you're on the platform. Thank you. And I believe then that we move to well workovers. Is that true, Ms. Katz?
Yes, I believe so. If the other parties are good with that, we can go to that or to either that or natural gas well liquid unloading. But I'm fine to go with well workovers. So I guess maybe ask the other parties.
All right. Is there anyone who has a preference otherwise? Just turn on your camera. I think we're on well workovers now, Ms. Katz. And we have a little less. Oh, there's Mr. Heiser.
I was wondering if you wanted to sneak in Mr. Myers' just brief discussion of that one spreadsheet and the disagreement on the one line, if that would make sense before we did a whole new topic, assuming that's okay with Ms. Katz.
That's fine with me. That makes sense.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Myers should be available on the panel side.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome back, Mr. Meyer. Madam Hearing Officer, if you could share the screen. She says you should be able to share. Mr. Meyer?
Okay. Okay.
So this is essentially the spreadsheet that we saw earlier from Mr. Palmer, correct?
Correct.
And so it reflects in the column C, the 18,100, which is the Valor estimate for the combustor. And then you have it, there was a discussion about what was included in the area that was previously called storage vessel retrofit. And then Mr. Palmer said we were replacing the tank, and so we understood to use the tank replacement cost. Did you go back into the EPA CTG and review what the CTG said was covered by the storage vessel retrofit?
I did. And what it said was that the storage vessel retrofit, as they called it, that in 2012 here, the 68,000 was associated with new piping, new headers, basically to bring the tank vapors to the control device.
So that's the air pollution control piping, basically, that would be required.
Right, which makes sense because the installation of that, even though it is just pipe, you have to support it. You have to, bring in crews and cranes possibly to lift it in place, that type of thing.
Okay, and so I know that you've added a value here which reflects 101,736. Is that the value from the 2012 expanded to 2019, and then to which you've added the cost of the new tank and its installation?
Correct. I added the 18,000, which was in my original direct testimony for the tank itself. Of course, that cost has gone up recently since then, honestly. But then the 15,000 is actually the installation of the cost. You need a bigger crane, right? And the crews associated with that. One point of clarification, Mr. Heiser, was that the 18,100 value is for a 60-inch combustor, which actually, believe it or not, flows less than a 48-inch high volume. The cost of a 48-inch high volume is 29,000. So I had kept this in here because it is on the low end. It is, you know, there may be sites that can get away with the 60. So it seemed like a reasonable number.
And so if you make those substitutions to put back into this, the cost of the piping, what does that show in the dollar per ton costs?
So that going down to the 3 tons per year, we're at just over $9,000.
Okay. With that, I think, I know that you did a little bit of work, but I think that's on what the impact would be, but I think that's beyond the scope really of what the department testified to. And so I thank you for that clarification, would make you available to the department if they have any questions, or to the board or any of the other parties for that as well. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Heiser and Mr. Meyer. If you are a party with questions, please turn on your screen. Let's see here. I'm not seeing anyone.
The department just said, thanks, Mr. Meyer, for his clarification.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Ms. Katz. Well, I will go to the board then. And while I'm doing that, if you're an attendee on this platform with a question, please reach out through chat. Madam Chair.
Yes, Madam Hearing Officer, I also echo Ms. Katz's comment, and thank you for the clarification, Mr. Myers. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
I don't have any questions either, and I appreciate everybody contributing to our questions and getting them answered. And I realize it's a big lift from everybody, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Member Kate?
Yeah, so do I. So thank you. And no questions here. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Bitzer?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia?
No questions, thank you.
And Member Honker? All right, no questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Heiser and Mr. Meyer.
Thank you.
We have about 20 minutes before I would take a break before the 5 o'clock public comment. Ms. Katz, can we do a little bit of the well workovers?
Yes, we certainly can. I think we can get the department's piece in it for sure. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, we'd have to ask. I believe that that IPA&M has, or maybe, yeah.
This is an IPA&M lead item and not an NMOGA lead item.
Yes, so I guess I would ask for Mr. Rose to weigh in on timing.
Timing's fine. Our witness is available anytime from here till the end of the day, so we're in good shape.
Okay, and we don't have Mr. Smitherman, so it's the same issue. I'll have to follow up with that tomorrow. Okay. This is, again, Ms. King and Mr. Palmer. This relates to section 20.2.50.124 of the rule covering well workovers. The testimony related to this section is in Nmed Exhibit 32, beginning on page 148, and Nmed Rebuttal Exhibit 1, beginning on page 96. The witnesses have adopted the testimony and there are no corrections. So I will ask Ms. Keene to please provide an overview of the operations that are covered by this section of the rule.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. We're discussing section 124, as Ms. Katz indicated. The repair or stimulation of an existing well or well workovers are required for the repair or stimulation of an existing well for restoring, prolonging, or enhancing the production of hydrocarbons. They're performed on completed wells that have produced reservoir fluids, water, oil, and or natural gas. And these wells have to be prepared before the workover operations can begin. If the well is still producing or has pressure, the well needs to be blown down or vented before it is safe to remove the tubing head and install the blowout preventers. The well pressure can be decreased by venting to the atmosphere or by opening the casing to the sales line or the suction of a well site compressor. Workovers are typically of short duration that only last a few days or weeks at the most. After the well is prepared, blown down and the blowout preventer installed, the workover operations can begin. For the safety of the workers, the well is usually allowed to vent to atmosphere via a tank for the duration of the workover. Since these operations are typically performed during daylight hours, the well is shut in or returned to the sales lane at the end of the day.
Can you discuss what the control options are for controlling emissions from well workovers?
Yes, best management practices are the best means of reducing emissions during well workovers. These include reducing the wellhead pressure before blowdown to minimize the volume of natural gas vented, monitoring manual venting at the well until the venting is complete, and routing natural gas to the sales line when possible.
And can you discuss the emission standards that are proposed in this section of the rule for well workovers?
Yes, the owner or operator of an oil or gas well must use the following best management practices during a workover event to minimize emissions consistent with the well site condition and good engineering practices. These include reducing wellhead pressure before the blowdown to minimize the volume of gas vented, monitoring the manual venting at the well until the venting is complete, and routing natural gas to the sales line if possible.
Can you summarize the requirements of the rule?
Yes, during a well workover, the owners or operators must monitor wellhead pressure, the natural gas venting flow rate, and elapsed time in order to calculate the volume and mass of VOC vented during the workover event. The owner operator must record the identification, the location, date, and pressure and flow rate, the duration of the event, and the best management practices used in the VOC emissions that are released. If venting cannot be avoided, the owner or operator must notify residents located within a quarter mile of the well at least 3 days before the workover event by certified mail or by other means of notice, if that notification can be documented. And when a workover is required due to routine or emergency situations to restore production due to a malfunction or upset, the owner operator must notify residents within 1/4 mile at least 24 hours before the event. And in addition, the owner operator must comply with the general requirements of section 112.
Thank you. And Mr. Palmer, can you please discuss the basis for the proposed requirements and the estimated emissions reductions and costs?
Sure. The basis for the proposed requirements for workover operations are Colorado Regulation 7 and also Wyoming's permitting guidance. Colorado Regulation 7 requires owners and operators to use best management practices to minimize emissions associated with downhole well maintenance, as well as well liquids unloading, well plugging unless emitting is necessary for safety reasons. It also requires operators to be on site and to minimize those emissions during the workover event to the maximum extent practicable. Wyoming's permitting guidance requires minimizing emissions to the extent practicable during manual and automated blowdown and venting episodes associated with liquids unloading, well bore, depressurization, and preparation for maintenance or repair and other well operations. The guidance also requires personnel to remain on site to ensure minimal gas venting occurs and requires that operators estimate VOC emissions from well workovers. As far as estimated emission reductions and cost estimates, emission estimates for workover operations are not currently available in the modeling emissions inventory or found in the Nmed equipment data. Therefore, we do not have an estimate of emission reductions for well workovers. As far as costs, the rule is proposing certain best management practices that must be used when conducting well workover operations, but it does not require the use of emission control devices. It is expected that these practices will require personnel to manage the well during the workover operation, but no capital costs are anticipated. So the costs associated with well workover best management practices are expected to be minimal, as personnel will already be on site conducting the well workover, and any additional training may be incorporated into existing personnel training programs.
Thank you. And Ms. Keene, can you briefly go through the rule language and the revisions that were made based on stakeholder comments?
Yes. As within other sections, we're following the same framework for requirements. The applicability sections identify what workovers are subject to this part. The emission standards identify the best management practices that must be followed. And this rule, or this section of the rule, is relies on best management practices to minimize emissions. We did hear from stakeholders that they wanted the insertion of good operational practices, which we added in addition to good engineering practices. The emission standards section requires, of course, those BMPs before you to reduce emissions. The monitoring requirements and identify the type of monitoring that must be performed. I've gone through those requirements in detail, so I won't restate those. The owner operator is required to calculate the estimated volume of mass of VOC vented during a workover event. That was a requested change that the department agreed to. The record keeping requirements identify what records must be kept to demonstrate compliance with the emission standards and record keeping of the specific monitoring that's required. We've added we've made a number of changes to these that did not change the scope or intent of the rule, but addressed comments that we received that we thought were legitimate. So again, we're having recording of the date the workover was performed, the wellhead pressure, flow rate of the gas to the extent feasible, the duration of venting to the atmosphere, a description of the best management practices used to minimize VOC emissions, then a calculation of the estimated VOC emissions based on the duration, volume, gas composition, and also recording the method of notification that was provided to the public and a proof that notification was made. The reporting requirements outline the notices that we've required to be made to the public for a well workover event. So that's specifically called out in paragraph E2. If it is not feasible to prevent VOC emissions from being emitted to the atmosphere from a workover event, the owner or operator shall provide notice by certified mail or other effective means, so long as the notice can be documented to all residents located within a quarter mile of the well of the planned workover event at least 3 days before the workover event. And we received a request to add in a provision for those workovers that are responding to upset or malfunction event. And so that is outlined in paragraph 3. That requires, if the workover is needed for routine or emergency maintenance to restore production due to malfunction or upset, that the owner or operator shall notify residents within a quarter mile at least 24 hours before the workover event. that was the last slide on that. There is, yeah, that was the last slide on that section.
Thank you. And that's concludes the department's presentation of the summary of its direct and rebuttal on well workovers.
All right, thank you. Let me ask any party with a question to turn on their camera. Not seeing anyone. I'll turn to the board. If you're an attendee with a question, please reach out through chat, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I don't have any questions at this point.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
I don't have any questions either. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Kate.
No questions here, thanks.
Member Bitzer.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia.
No questions, thank you.
And Member Honker.
No questions, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Katz, Ms. Keene, and Mr. Palmer. I know that we go to IPA&M to hear from Mr. Davis. Mr. Jano did reach out in the chat that Mr. Holderman has some briefs or rebuttal, but he's not available right now, so he'll be presenting a little bit tomorrow when he presents on flowback. Let's see. Mr. Rose, I do want to take a break within the next, 5 minutes or so.
Mr. Davis's testimony may not take that long, and I suspect there won't be many questions, but I can't predict how that may end, but we can certainly try to get this done.
All righty, let's go for it.
I believe he's on the platform somewhere.
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can actually see you too. Mr. Davis, your testimony has been previously admitted as, I believe it's IPA&M Exhibit 2 and Exhibit 10. Could you briefly summarize your direct and rebuttal testimony on well workovers?
Yes, sir, Mr. Rose. I believe that Ms. Keene did a really good job of talking through what the well workover purpose is, as well as the emission source related to well workovers. So I wasn't going to go into any more detail there. I would say that's provided in my pre-filed written direct and rebuttal. Ms. Keene also did a very good job of outlining the changes that were made based on stakeholder input. And I would like to thank the department for those changes. I would say they addressed the majority of our concerns regarding well workover operations. The one place that we still have some concerns on, and this is provided in my testimony, the department moved to separate the workover operations into what I would say are two categories, kind of the planned workovers, which would be your recompletions, your restimulation type work. This is something that we have to get regulatory approval to move forward with, and going forward with some type of notification there wouldn't really cause much of a delay in terms of performing that workover. So we do appreciate that new clarification in terms of the two categories. However, we still have some concerns regarding just the administrative burden in terms of the notification that's required on the routine workovers. We have, and this is speaking for Marion, the company that I work for, we have several wells that are in somewhat densely populated areas. Most of these wells were there first. Housing developments have encroached on these well sites, and just have some concerns about the administrative burden of doing that notification of all residents within a quarter mile. Some instances that could be upwards of 150 residents, and then the record keeping that's associated with doing the notification, getting confirmation of that notification, and building the record for each routine well workover that we perform in these areas. So that's really the only issue that we have that's outstanding with well workovers at this point.
And do you have any recommendations for the board with respect to your remaining issues?
You know, I think there's a couple things. I would say it's standard practice for most operators to notify the adjacent residents. We usually put up signs at the entrance of the well sites with you know, notification that we are working on that well. The quarter mile, again, just in these urban settings, it seems like it encompasses a lot of residents for notification purposes. So maybe consider bringing that notification buffer down to something that's a little more reasonable in terms of the number of residents that must be notified.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I have no further questions of this witness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose and Mr. Davis. If there's any party with a question, please turn on your camera. Not seeing anyone. I'll turn to the board. If you're an attendee with a question, please reach out through the chat. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and I appreciate you sharing those concerns, Mr. Davis. But at this time, I don't have any additional questions.
Thank you. Vice Chair Trujillo Davis.
I don't have any additional questions either. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Cates.
Yep, no questions here. Thank you.
Member Bitzer.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garcia.
No questions, thank you.
And Member Honker.
No questions. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you all very much, Mr. Rose and Mr. Davis. Let's break until 5. We'll return for public comment. Thank you.